Okay, so there's this story that's just kind of blown up everywhere online. It's about this 22-year-old student, Laura, and she decided to auction off her virginity online.
Oh.
Yeah. And the winning bid
Uh-huh.
ended up coming from a Hollywood actor for 18 crore.
That's that's a lot.
Yeah, no, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. I mean, it's certainly a headline grabber, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
But I think beyond that initial shock, what I find really fascinating is that it kind of forces us to look at some of the really big questions we're all dealing with these days,
Right.
like personal freedom and how our values are changing so rapidly, and especially with this whole digital world we live in now, this idea that everything can be, well, commodified.
Yeah, it feels like everything's up for sale now, doesn't it?
It really does.
And this story kind of brings all these hot button issues together,
Yeah.
sex and money and technology and like what's right and wrong. It's all kind of swirling around in this one story.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some of you listening are just like, whoa, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But I hope you'll stick with us because this deep dive is not really about judging Laura.
Yeah.
It's more about using her story as a starting point to really dig into, the world we live in now.
I think that's a really important distinction to make. And to really get into that, I think we have to start with understanding where Laura is coming from. From what I've read, she had a fairly religious upbringing, but she herself never really saw virginity as something super important to hold on to. She
Oh.
always viewed this auction as a way to get what she wanted, like financial security, being independent, reaching her goals faster.
It's interesting because on the one hand, it seems super practical.
Hmm.
Especially nowadays, everyone's talking about side hustles and making money any way they can, so it kind of fits into that.
Yeah.
But then again, it brings up some pretty tough questions, like how much freedom do we really have when things like societal pressure and just the reality of needing money are so deeply woven into the choices we make?
It's the age-old question of nature versus nurture, right?
Yeah.
Like how much of who we are and what we do is really our choice versus, the system we're born into. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
And, it really makes you think, is this some kind of radical self-ownership, taking control?
Mhm.
Or is it more like a sign that we're just being pushed more and more to turn every single part of our lives into a way to make money? Even the most personal parts. I mean, look at how many influencers are out there selling carefully crafted versions of their lives and people building careers on platforms like OnlyFans.
Right. Right.
It's where's the line? If we're okay with those things, then what makes this so different?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole feminist side of things. Some people say that true empowerment for women means being able to make any choice you want,
Yeah.
even if it makes people uncomfortable.
And that's where things get really, really complex.
Yeah.
Because even within feminism, there are so many different perspectives.
Right.
Some branches are all about breaking down those traditional power structures, the ones that have always limited women's choices. But then you have others who say, hold on, we need to dismantle the entire system that profits off of turning women's bodies and experiences into commodities in the first place.
Yeah.
So even within that framework, it's not simple.
Not at all. It's interesting, too, how the public's been reacting to all of this.
Yeah.
It seems like the internet just kind of went, whoa.
Yeah.
And you have people on both sides. Some are praising Laura for being bold and taking control. And then others are saying this is a terrible thing, setting a bad example, like the ultimate example of something sacred being turned into just another product.
I think that strong reaction on both sides, it really tells us something. It's like we're seeing the cracks in how we as a society are viewing all these difficult concepts. Intimacy, morality, what it means for a woman to have agency. It's like how much has really changed? How far have we really come?
Yeah. It's a good question. And it does feel like this debate is about so much more than just what she did. It's like, what happens next? Do other people start doing this? What about future generations? How will they look at virginity now? And what about Laura herself? Will she regret this later on?
Absolutely. And there's a whole psychological piece to this, too. I mean, there are studies about people who make these big controversial financial decisions, especially ones that cross personal boundaries. And a lot of times, regret comes later. It's like a delayed reaction. So who knows what will happen with Laura?
Right. And it makes you think about her future relationships, too.
Yeah.
Like, imagine going on a date and trying to explain all of this. Would people admire her for doing this? Or would they be weirded out? It really shows you how important it is to be on the same page about values and to
Right.
just be open and honest in any relationship.
Totally. And it's not even just about her personal relationships. I mean, what if this whole idea of virginity being something you can buy and sell, what if that becomes normal?
I don't know. That's kind of scary to think about.
It is a little bit, right? Because then how do we form real connections with people? Could it lead to like a split in society where
Yeah.
some people see intimacy as something deeply personal and others see it as just another thing to make money off of?
That's a really interesting thought. And of course, we can't forget that the whole concept of virginity is already loaded with all this baggage from the past.
Mm.
It's been used for centuries to control women,
Hmm.
tied up with all these ideas about purity and being good
Mm.
that are really just about what society expects, not about the individual person.
You hit the nail on the head. Historically, virginity has been this tool, especially in societies where men have all the power. A woman's worth was tied directly to her sexual history.
Wow.
So it makes the whole feminist argument even more complicated, you know?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, there's this idea that if we can just remove the stigma around virginity, it could be really freeing. Like it could lead to a healthier, more open way of thinking about sex without shame.
But on the other hand, if we erase it completely, like it doesn't mean anything, does that take away from the real emotional weight that comes with those experiences? Is there a way to find a balance,
Yeah.
where we respect both individual choice and the fact that these are really important moments in our lives?
That's the million-dollar question. And Laura's story kind of forces us to face it head on. It's like she's holding up this mirror, showing us our own anxieties about freedom and what we believe is right and wrong and how we value things in this world where everything's digital and everything's online.
It really does feel like we're at a crossroads, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does feel like we're at a crossroads. And it's a mirror, reflecting some pretty tough stuff about how we're dealing with all this change. But, we've been focusing a lot on Laura and her choice, but haven't really talked much about the other person in this whole situation.
The buyer.
Yeah, this Hollywood actor, the one who put up the winning bid. What's his part in all this? What does that tell us?
It's true. We've mostly been talking about Laura's side because, well, she's the one who started the auction. But you're right, there's another person here who's actively taking part in all of this.
Hmm.
It does make you wonder, what are his reasons? And what does that say about, the power dynamics going on here?
Exactly. I mean, on the surface, you could say he's just some rich guy who wants to spend a ton of money on something he thinks is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But I think there's more to it than that, don't you?
Yeah, for sure.
It sort of brings up this really uncomfortable idea that men with a lot of money can basically buy anything they want, including, women's bodies.
Yeah, it's hard not to think about that. It just feels, I don't know, kind of icky. It brings up all these questions about women being seen as objects and the idea that in a world where money equals power, intimacy can become just another transaction.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, and it's really important to remember that even if both people say they're okay with it, there's always the chance that someone's being taken advantage of. We're talking about a huge power imbalance here, both financially and socially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even if we assume that Laura is going into this knowing exactly what she's doing and feeling totally in control, there's just no way to know what the emotional impact will be. Losing your virginity is a big deal for a lot of people, no matter what they believe. It's often tied up with all these expectations and pressures from society, hopes and fears,
Hmm.
To have that potentially turned into just a business deal, I can't imagine that wouldn't leave some kind of mark.
Right, and even if she's thinking about it in a purely practical way right now, there's no guarantee those feelings won't change down the road. What if she starts feeling things she didn't expect? What if the actual experience isn't what she thought it would be? What if regret sets in later? Those are all very real possibilities that we have to consider.
For sure. And leaving aside the emotions for a second, how will all of this affect her future relationships? Will she always be wondering if the people she's with are interested in her for who she is, or if
Yeah.
they're just hung up on her past? Will she feel like she has to live up to this image of being this, bold, empowered woman that everyone's put on her?
It's a valid concern. This one decision could really stick with her, affecting how she sees herself and how others see her. And that brings us back to a much bigger question. If it becomes normal to think of virginity as something you can buy and sell, what does that do to how we value genuine human connection? Love, intimacy that's not about money or a deal.
It's kind of a scary thought. Are we headed towards a world where everything has a price tag, where even the most personal, intimate things are just turned into commodities? Or can we find a way to navigate all this new freedom and technology without losing sight of the things that make us human? Things like connection, empathy, knowing that some things just aren't for sale.
That's the balancing act we're all trying to figure out, isn't it? How do we hold on to individual freedom while still thinking about our responsibility to each other? How do we go after our own goals and dreams without sacrificing our ethics? Laura's story just really highlights how tough those questions are.
It definitely does. It's a reminder that there's no easy answer, no simple right or wrong in these situations. But maybe by talking about these things, by really wrestling with these tough issues, we can move towards a future where everyone can make choices that feel right for them and that lead to better lives.
I agree. And for you listening out there, I think Laura's story challenges all of us to think about our own beliefs around sex, morality, and this trend of personal experiences becoming something you can buy. It makes us face some uncomfortable questions, like where do we draw the line between personal freedom and what we owe to society? What really matters to us in relationships and when it comes to intimacy? And maybe most importantly, what kind of world do we want to build for ourselves and for the generations coming after us? These are questions without easy answers, but they're questions we can't ignore.
It's like a wake-up call. It's telling us to think critically about the choices we make and how those choices affect not just us, but everyone around us. It reminds us that the future isn't just something that happens. It's something we're all creating together through our actions, our decisions, and the conversations we have. So let's keep talking about these things. Let's keep asking questions, exploring, and trying to understand this world we're all living in as it keeps changing.
Because it's by talking openly and thinking critically that we can hope to create a future that's fair, fulfilling, and maybe even a little bit magical.
Now, I think it's worth taking a moment to shift gears a bit and think about some of the real-world consequences of all of this. This isn't just some abstract philosophical debate, it's Laura's life. And her decision is going to have real effects. It brings up legal questions, too, like, is it even legal to sell your virginity online? How do we regulate something like this?
That's a really good point. And the law is actually pretty unclear when it comes to this specific act. In a lot of places, there aren't laws that directly say you can't sell your virginity, but there are laws against things like prostitution and human trafficking that could maybe apply. It really depends on how the whole thing is set up and whether anyone's being forced or pressured, which can be hard to prove.
It's like a whole new challenge for lawmakers and ethicists to figure out. And even if it is legal, there's still the social stigma that comes with a choice like this. Laura's already facing a lot of judgment and criticism, and it's probably going to follow her for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. We live in a world where online shaming is everywhere, and something like this can have a big impact on someone's reputation and how people see them. It makes you think about things like forgiveness, second chances, and whether we as a society are willing to let people grow and change after they've made mistakes.
It seems like we're still trying to figure out how to balance our changing views on sex with these really deep-rooted social norms. And the internet, with all its echo chambers and tendency to make things more dramatic, just makes it harder.
Yeah, it's almost like technology is pushing these cultural changes faster than we can keep up with. It's forcing us to face some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we're creating. But as unsettling as that can be, it's also an incredible opportunity.
That's a good way to look at it. Because in all the uncertainty and discomfort, there's also a chance for us to learn and grow and make things better. It's forcing us to rethink our values, to talk honestly about things that used to be taboo, and to try to build a future that's more inclusive and empowering for everyone.
Yeah, it does feel like we're all kind of writing this new chapter in human history. And Laura's story is just one small part of this really big, complicated story that's still unfolding. It is, and it's a good reminder that we're all part of something much bigger than ourselves. Everything we do, even the little things, can have an impact and help create a world that's more fair, compassionate, and, well, just more meaningful.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Laura's story isn't just about her, it's about all of us. It's about the choices we make, the things we value, and the kind of future we're building together.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that we have a say in things. We can sit back and watch, or we can actively participate in creating a world that reflects what we really care about. A world where everyone feels empowered to be themselves and make choices that feel right, even if those choices challenge the way things are.
Because in the end, that's what real progress is all about,
Yeah.
right? Pushing ourselves outside our comfort zones, questioning what we think we know, and having these tough conversations that help us navigate this crazy, ever-changing world.
It is. And maybe that's where the real magic is, in the messy, uncomfortable, and often exciting process of figuring it all out together.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next week with another fascinating story that's sure to make you think.
Until then, keep those conversations going.